We're doing a program tonight about really creativity and collaboration and creativity. And we've got one of the preeminent olfactory artists here with us tonight, which is wonderful. And we have one of the world's most important creative directors with us. So I'm thrilled. We're going to do some questions, and then we're going to smell some things. Take it away.
So I guess I should introduce myself. Thanks for coming, everybody. I see some familiar faces here. I think there's one question I would like to ask before we get started is, how many people actually have a connection to the industry already who are in the audience tonight? It's a fair number, right? And
how many do not?
How many don't? Well, thank you for coming. Really, no.
This is for you.
It's a special delight to see you here this evening because these events are, in the end, going to be for you. And what we'll do is we'll talk about what we want to do today is talk about how we design products and how the collaboration that we do gets us there. But on top of that, we'll then show you through some of the innovative things going through, and we'll smell some things afterwards. So, maybe Laurent, you could introduce yourself.
So again, I think a lot of people know me, but for the one, thank you again for coming. I would like to start to thank Chandler because I think what he has done is remarkable. To bring scent to a museum was, I think, a real challenge, and thank you so much for doing that.
Pleasure. It's great. I'm thrilled to be here, everybody.
I want to thank Ian for having me with him tonight. And so to introduce myself, my name is Laurent Le Guernec, and as you can tell, I was born in the Bronx.
Is that a line you use all the time?
All the time, and it works every single time.
Good.
So I'm French. I'm a perfumer. I've been in the industry for 23 years. Most of my career has been in the US. I studied in France because unfortunately for most of the people in the world, that's one of the only countries where you can learn how to become a perfumer. So to make it a little short, because if not I'll be talking and talking and talking. So I'm a perfumer. I work in a company called International Flavor and Fragrances. I've been there for 10 years. And I'm very happy to be here tonight and to share my passion, which is creating beautiful scent.
Laurent, where did you graduate? Where did you study?
I studied in France in a school called ISIPCA.
In Versailles?
In Versailles, which was like one of the only school outside of the industry where you could learn how to become a perfumer.
No.
Because it is a very small world that's very difficult to get in. It's a little mafia. In a way. And actually today, that school become a new mafia.
Right.
And for those who don't know me, I work for Procter & Gamble in the prestige business. I've been in that business for 20-some years now. And what I do is, my job is to help bring the creative dream of our designers and the expertise and creativity of perfumers together and build that into fragrances for the appropriate audiences. So yes, I work to help lead the fragrance design team, and we're based in London.
Right, the fragrance design, and I should correct myself because we were talking earlier, I said creative director, and you said actually no, it has to be ultimately, if it's for a Boss fragrance, it has to be Hugo Boss.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our job is to bring the vision of the designers to life, but they need expertise because it's so specialized. So that's where we come in, and we help with obviously the experts in the industry. That's how you build fragrances.
Would you say, Ian, that at Procter & Gamble there is a much more intense, it seems to me this is certainly the case, there's a much more intensive collaboration between the licensee, Procter & Gamble in this case, and the artists, Laurent, for example?
I think so, because one of the things we did in the very early days is we moved the concept of how you design fragrances into our R&D organization, mostly about the D rather than just the science. It's the D as much as the R, because we're there for a much longer time and we can interact and learn about products in a different way and build the expertise. And so what we're able to do is work with perfumers even away from the demands of the next initiative to develop great products and bring the discipline to bear to build great fragrances. it's not something you can do that quickly. So there's a genius in a fragrance, and we'll make an example of this later on. But it takes some effort to bring all of the other things to life to build a fragrance in the right way for the right audience.
One of the things I think that, and I think this is very interesting, I actually haven't told you guys this anecdote. When I was starting out, and this goes directly to our question of collaboration between the creative design and the, by the way, Procter & Gamble is one of the most important patrons of this medium, of this artistic medium in the world, and that's extremely important. And artistic mediums have always had patrons. Prada has now made herself one of the most important patrons of contemporary art, paint, but obviously there are other mediums that she buys also. And I mean, there are a lot of people like this. And Procter & Gamble is a hugely important patron of scent. When I was talking to Francois Demachy about this, and I've known Francois for a long time, I just brought the idea of the department here, and he said, well, it's an art, but he said, there's so many people involved, and he said, and I said, well, so what? And he said, well, it's not a paint. I mean, a work of art is really sort of one person. It's not a lot of people. I said, really, movies? And he laughed. He said, "Okay, I see your point." We have sort of, and I want to bring this up immediately. What we're looking at is a paradigm. I think that most people, when we think art, for some reason, we think painting, and I'm not sure why, because we're all exposed to architecture and dance and music and all these other things, but we sort of think painting, and painting is a very solitary, perhaps the most solitary art of all, more than composing. Because if you think about music, the composer writes these things down. He writes down the notes, but you have to have a performer or performers, sometimes up to 30, 40 of them, and you have to have a conductor. So what is the work of art? Is the work of art the piece of paper on which you see the notes? Is it the conductor who interprets them, or is it the performer who performs them? With scent, I think you have exactly the same question. The answer, of course, is it's all these people. It's all of them. And I think that it's very much like an orchestral piece, a work of music.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we often use as the simile of our industry is to think about the movie industry. It's not just the lead director, it's not the lead actor who makes the finished product. You need more. And one of the great things that we can do in with the approach that we're taking is this is a very collaborative business. We need to work together with people because you get more. You get more creativity, and you get greater finish, and you create better products. You've got more access when you work together to the technology, and you can just create fragrances that, if you invest the time and energy, you create better products. Would you agree? Laurent?
Yeah, and actually, I have my little notes, sorry. Because I'm very nosy and curious. And when you look at the definition of what art is, in a dictionary, they say art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty and emotional power. That's exactly what we do as a perfumer.
Did you write that down?
No.
You came up with it? No?
I Googled
Somebody
it.
else? Oh, really? You Googled that?
I Googled that.
Who wrote it?
No, the dictionary. I don't know who wrote the dictionary.
All right.
But it is an art form. Yes, at the end, compared to a painter who just need one buyer, we need to sell our art to many people.
Right.
And that's where it becomes much more
But of course,
difficult.
So do directors, so do composers, it depends on the art.
Yeah.
Architects, one client. Painters, one client by definition. Composers, millions.
So it is an art.
Yeah.
And I think we could take it a step further. If we start, this is the Museum of Art and Design, and the other part you could argue that we're doing, because when we get to the commercial side of things, which we're all, many of us here tonight, aware of, we're having to design products for an audience. And one of the interesting definitions of design is it's art with a defined purpose.
Right.
So yes, the perfumers, and there are some others in the room, some very esteemed faces here, who they'll know much better than me how much it takes to create great art, and this is what you're doing as a perfumer. But to create it for a purpose is a challenge, and that's the other piece that has to be brought in and that we have to work together to do.
When you take a specific work of art, for example, Procter & Gamble directed work of art. What do you feel is your role? I'm just interested in having you define the role for the people who actually are civilians in this case. What is your role, and how do you see your role, Laurent? Ian?
I think what the piece that we bring to bear on this is, on one side, the technical discipline. That's not terribly exciting to sound like that, but to understand how the fragrance performs versus what we need it to do for our audience.
So the conceptual blueprint.
The conceptual blueprint belongs to the creative, and our job is to help people like Laurent bring their creative genius to bear and finish it in a way that's appropriate to the audience we're designing it for, whether we're designing it for one of the more niche brands or for P&G has brands all at different price points and for different audiences.
Yeah.
You don't want to finish a fragrance the same way if you're doing it for a teenager than you would for someone who's a grown adult.
What does finish mean?
Finish is to do with, you keep the idea, but how you present it to the consumer. You might wrap up certain things, you might scale some things up, scale some things down, dial up the power, dial down the power.
You're talking. I just want to make it very clear. You're talking about the actual work of olfactory art. You're talking about the scent, not
the scent
packaging.
Specifically. No, my actual job ends where the scent ends. I do not actually get involved directly in marketing of products.
What's an example of dialed up and dialed down? Can you use specific examples in the Parfum collection?
If you dial something up, you're overdosing certain materials, and you're also dialing up potentially the actual concentration of the fragrance, and you're making them bigger.
Right.
Some examples from our business would be sitting on. You could use the examples of what would be the best one. I think you could use some interesting ones with some of our Dolce & Gabbana or some of our Gucci fragrances.
For example?
If you take Guilty, we've got a great fragrance there, and what you do is you make sure that there's real presence and power in these fragrances. Whereas if you were working for a young audience, you might do something different. On the other hand, if you want to have great fun and work on an Escada fragrance, you want, especially for the summer editions, you want to dial up those fruits
way up, right?
And way up to extreme because they're great fun, and everybody loves working on them, and they're great fun every year.
One of the things I remember opening the Escada. I just started the New York Times, and they sent me an Escada, and I thought, Jesus Christ, it's like somebody put this photograph of summer, but this sort of idealized idea of summer. You know, you're at the beach, and there's this fruit, and there's this things are hanging from the trees, and you know, this sort of thing. And they put it on a television screen, and they saturated the color, and it was fantastic. And I wore it around the office, and somebody said, God, it smells like you just came from a samba party. And you know what? They didn't like it. I loved it. I mean, it was a very different way, but it was extremely dialed up. I loved it.
And this is the thing, there's not one right way to create art, but when you're designing it for an audience, then there is one right answer for that group of people.
Gucci Envy is exceedingly dialed up.
Yes.
It's huge volume.
I just want to add something when it comes to design. And again, it's for the people who are not in our industry, because most of you know how it works. I think what's very important, to say, because always unfortunately, I would say big company have a bad rap. And I have to say, working with Iaian, he works in a very, very different way. We always start from a creative idea. There is not a project associated to what we start with. That comes a little later. So we already have a freedom as a perfumer to come with a creative idea. It's not attached to a brief. It doesn't have to be feminine, masculine, oriental, fresh. I think as a perfumer, we really have the freedom to start from almost anything we want. And that for me is very important, because we always think because at the end you have to design something that's going to answer some question for the audience. But we really start from whatever we want.
Have you worked together? I actually don't even know.
Oh, for many years.
When you bring him something, what do you do? What do you generally do? You make a sketch, you have an idea, you present him with something, you present him with one thing or several different things?
And I think, for me, I've been in the industry for 22 years, and it's a gift for someone when you just bring an accord or an ingredients to see what he's going to be able to do with it. And that, there is not too many people who can do that. So that's a luxury for a perfumer, to be able to really start from an ingredient. It can be a simple ingredient.
You mean you will bring an
it can
ingredient
be
or a simple accord?
I will show Iaian one ingredient.
Really?
And from there, oh my God, that's wonderful. And from there we
One
start.
raw material?
One raw material.
Do you remember one? I mean, I'm fascinated. Was there one that you could specifically you can remember? And
Do you have
why?
example?
Well, we were looking at some things earlier in the week, right? So there's some very interesting.
There are.
Sometimes it's materials.
There are,
sometimes
like,
But you're
it's
not going to
chords.
tell us? You're not going to tell me?
No, because
I'll keep it a secret. It's off the record.
They'll never find out, right?
So can you sign paper? No, but just to go back to the point where like it's always a challenge, you know, as a perfumer to like first of all to share just like something as simple as an ingredient or an accord, and that to have the person that you're going to work with to understand what you can do with it.
But understanding, Ian has brought you a brief. He's brought you
Nope.
the commission
Nope.
at that point.
What we do at the early stages is we do pure fragrance design.
Really?
So we start wherever we want, and then as we get down the track, we start to figure out, so where should we take it? But the pure part of of this business that allows, you know, and there are people in the audience who can hopefully concur with me on this. What we want to do is we want to bring, and my job is to let the creative part of, and there are some enormously capable creatives that I'm very lucky to have the access to.
Mm-hmm.
And they have so many great ideas. And one of the fun things we can do is then try and figure out which are the basic places we should go that haven't been done in perfumery before, or that would bring something new and innovative. Because in the end, what do we want to do? We want to go and create new and innovative and distinctive products appropriate to each of the audiences, and that's where the design piece comes in. But up front, it's a purely creative process.
So let's talk at first aesthetics and then design. Aesthetics. I'm a writer. I write books. I have a very specific relationship with my editors. Is it like that? Do you then do drafts and he's going to edit them? Because most of the editing, some of the editing's for grammar and structure and this kind of thing, but really a lot of it is about the sense. Is that what you get from Ian?
I don't think it's editing. I think after it's like it's a teamwork.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I show him an accord or when I show him an ingredient, usually I have like already an idea where I'm going to take it.
Right.
And after that's where I start to show something that's a little more complicated, like, you know, it's almost like a sketch. And after that's when we start to build. You know, it's like it's that sketch. You know, you need to have like all the technical aspect of a fragrance. You know, so you need to build or to really implement the design.
Okay, so then let's go immediately to the design. Design, structure. Both of you, what do they mean? Laurent?
Design for me is figuring out and making your product suited for the audience you're designing it for. So let's take some of these fun Escada fragrances. They are intended to be for the summer and colorful and yet still luxury.
Mm-hmm.
And so we dial certain things up, and we'll finish the fragrance in that route.
Define finish?
Finish is about how you present it. So it's to do with the power, the colorfulness, how much you're going to build into the story of the fragrance itself, which needs to shine through, whichever way you deliver it. So the design piece, there is an element of editing when we talk about finishing fragrances, but what we want to do is, as much as we can, build in the balance between the pure creative idea and then the elements which finish the fragrance so that people can understand it.
Then if that's design, then what's structure?
Structure is an element for me of design.
But is it how, to me, structure has always been something very, very specific. It has been, I remember going in and, Jesus Christ, I don't know how political I have to be now because, I mean, it was a specific perfume. I'll err on the side of being political. How's that, Dia? Does that sound good? Okay, so there was a perfume that I went in there, and it had just come out, and it was absolutely extraordinary. And I was in duty free, which is, you know, you spray 8,000 things on yourself, and you sit on the plane, you piss everybody else off, but you live with the sense, right? And by the time you got into London, you know what you love and you hate and this kind of thing, and what do you admire. And it was fascinating to me because I put it on. I wasn't going to buy any of these. I put it on, and it was fantastic. I can't remember who the artist was, but I remember what the scent was. And I remember sort of going out, and they called my flight, and I walked to the terminal gate, which was maybe 3 minutes away, and smelled the thing. The thing had imploded on my arm. Imploded. It was still the same sort of, it was a big, bright, there was a floral fruit aspect to it. The fruit was garish. The light was now too strong. The floral C had died. It had no structure to it whatsoever. And is that the way you would understand it as well?
Yes, very much. I think you need. This is to do with, if you've designed your fragrance correctly, it will proceed in the way that you desired from one point to the next. If it's chaotic, then you probably haven't figured certain elements of the fragrance out, or perhaps you've proceeded too quickly, which is one of the things that we allow ourselves.
How do you create structure? How do you do it? How do you give a work solid structure?
How much time do I have?
Couple minutes.
Couple minutes. I just want almost like to take an example again for the people who are not in our industry, because we can get lost in our technical things. For me, a perfume, it's like a story. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you have a good perfume, when you capture the audience with a great beginning, that you want to keep reading it, that the middle continue that beautiful story, and at the end of the story, actually, the audience will fall in love with.
And you're talking about how it all holds together at every stage.
Exactly. It's like, so usually, unfortunately, like the only way we can describe fragrance usually are like top, mid, dry. But I like that kind of like, storytelling, because actually in a fragrance we are trying to tell a story.
So how do you do that?
Okay, so
how do you keep
all right, so
the chassis on the car? How do you keep the wheels on? How do you make it perform like a Maserati and not like a cheaper car? That was diplomatic, right?
Yes. But and again, it's like I think like you cannot say it's a cheaper car and an expensive car, because at the end they have to deliver the same thing in a certain way, technically.
Yeah, but I was in a Mercedes 500 SL last night, and it was just like.
Yeah, but
and we've all worn these senses.
True.
I think. One upstairs is Prada Amber. It's one of the 12 works that I'm exhibiting. It is absolutely silken, and the structure is perfect. It's one of the reasons I put it in there. I think that the structure, it's a very romanticist perfume with all this emotion, but it has an ironclad structure on it that makes it, that surrounds it.
Again, it was designed to please that audience. No.
But that's not what I'm asking you.
Okay, so let's go back to, so do I create, okay. So first of all, for people who don't know how perfume works, it's like we usually, okay, let's go back to the beginning. You have around 6,000 ingredients that you can play with. As a perfumer, when you go to school, you learn and try to memorize almost every single one of them. The way you do it, you describe them, that remind me of a fruit, or it's a little green, it's a little woody. And you follow that ingredients, because each ingredient has a lifetime. Some ingredients will last 5 seconds, some a couple of minutes, some couple hours, some couple weeks, and some couple of months. And that will influence how you use them in a composition. With experience, you know how to build certain notes, you know how to build certain structure, but you have to make sure that like every single ingredients are going to work at a certain time. And sometime, even if you think technically you know how it's working, I think fragrance is a very difficult art, and thank God for us, because if not, a machine could do it. Every time you put a new ingredients in a new blend, that changes the structure.
It changes the way all of them behave.
So
right?
we have certain things that yes works most of the time, but it doesn't work all the time.
Are you saying primarily that to achieve the really good structure, what you're doing is you're taking their materials, you're doing in the creative process, the aesthetic process with Ian, and then you're doing also a performance. I think that performance is probably the best. Performant, it's probably the best word.
It's a technical performance, yes.
Right. And is it time? Is it saying this is going to last this way, this will last this way, this will last this way, up until you get to a certain period, and then it will evolve naturally and beautifully? Are you timing all of your little pieces that you're putting in there?
No, you're not timing. I think, again, after it's experience. It's like, when you're cooking, you know that if you had, certain things together, they will stick. If you add flour with butter in a sauce, they will thicken.
What if you wanted him to give you a perfume that performed in a very specific way?
Well, this is the key about designing great fragrances, is to go look, to go and wear them in the appropriate way. One of the challenges in an industry with many initiatives and a lot of initiative pressure, where there's lots of new things coming through, is sometimes shortcuts come through and people don't actually spend the time to check what it's like at 1 minute, 3 hours,
Right.
6 hours, 9 hours. And of course, who you're designing it for really matters. So you're designing it, if you're making a fragrance for the Middle East, power means a different thing than if you're designing a fragrance for the USA.
Right.
And you'd build another product. And the main thing to do, because as long as we all know what we're working on, and these are the choices we make early on, is where are we taking the idea? Because it's not just, I mean, there's lots of new things coming through. One of the great things is our access to this enormous array of materials, all of which could be interesting. But it's how you deal with them, and this is the brilliance of the perfumers, and why I'm always in awe of the way that the people I work with come up with these creative ideas. And part of our team, and why you need a collaborative team, is to get back to the idea of you need to help spot the things and do that measurement and look at the different fragrances and spend the time getting to know the product in the right way. And is it doing what you're hoping it was going to do? And a useful simile that you could use in many ways, you know, I've come from the UK, the Olympics have just been, so forgive me, but in many ways, it's like being the coach to the star athlete. They're the ones who are the actually brilliant people. They're the ones who are actually going to deliver. But unless there's people helping all those elements come together, it's quite difficult to do that on your own.
We're going to look at, why don't we start talking about start smelling some of the elements. Okay. We're going to keep talking while we do this, and you're welcome to ask some questions as well.
All right.
Now, when do you want to do your presentation?
Why don't we switch to that now?
All right,
and let people listen in, because what we can do now, I'm going to move across to the other side of the room if I make sure I'm not used to using microphones like this, because what we'll do now is share with you some materials. We're going to start and tell you a story about how we design modern products and how that connects to the world of the past. If you would turn the projector on for me, please. Let's see if it's willing. There we go. So we're going to go all the way back initially to 1882. By the way, as we go through these, please feel free to ask questions or interrupt, because I think there's lots of things to smell. And we're going to go all the way back to Paul Paquet in 1882 with the original Fougère Royale. Now, I think we have a special treat for you in the audience. This is a very old fragrance. We have a reconstruction of this fragrance here for you to smell today. Oh, thank you. So, anybody who's not, I think, well, there's a lot of industry people here today, but just to remind you that the fragrance is dipped at the sharp end. So here you are, a classic Fougère.
So, just like for, again, you know, for people who are not in our industry, Fougère, actually what you smell, was the first Fougère ever created. And Fougère, it's a basic accord around lavender, geranium, oak moss, and a new molecule that was introduced at that time, which is called coumarin. So I have a sample of coumarin with me for the people who would like to smell it before, because most of you know what it smells like. But at least if you want to like smell that particular ingredients. That was the first time it was used, and that fragrance was created and was called Fougère, which become like the most important family of fragrances in the men's category.
Now, this is about as close as you can get with a modern reconstruction, because clearly at the time a lot of the musks were animal musks. A lot of these things, those materials we just don't use anymore, and you just can't get them. And we weren't going looking. So
it really it's just beautiful.
It's a beautiful reconstruction. It'll be pretty close to the original. There is a piece that you can't do. So that's an element of perfumery that is slightly different. But in fact, this structure has become one of the most popular structures in masculine fragrances everywhere. So it's a very important note to recognize and smell. So
and that accord, in a certain way, still exists in most every men's fragrance today. Maybe not exactly in the same dosage, but most of the ingredients I just described are still in most of the composition.
So how do you modernize a theme like this? Because actually, it's not as though all men's fragrances have to smell exactly the same. One of the questions then is, well, let's see what you can do. So let's use an example to show you how modern technology is helping move things forward. let's talk about mint. So, can we share the mint notes that that we're ready to share?
I just want to add why we picked mint. Because it was like one natural ingredient that we could show and share with you 3 different extraction and see how different they smell.
So what do you think of this? This is standard common or garden mint. It smells of toothpaste.
Peppermint, no?
Peppermint, right? It's a bright mint. It's very nice, but the associations, if you use this directly in fragrances, is going to take you to somewhere quite functional. But at the same time, it's very interesting. It's bright, it's fresh, it's got lots of power, it's got lots of structural things that could be helpful. But as it is, a bit difficult to use. Would you agree, Laurent?
It is, and unfortunately, that's a challenge, I think, in our industry. It's like there are so many products that have been used in different worlds that if someone can pick that mint in your composition, they go to toothpaste and forget luxury.
Yeah.
So let's go to start tipping the second one.
I think we have a slide to explain maybe,
We do, you're right, thank you, I forgot.
again, for how we extract an oil from mint leaves. So we will put like all the leaves in that big steam. We will put a lot of water in it. We will actually heat that big still through vapor. The water that's contained in that still will evaporate, and when the water evaporates, it will extract all the fragrance component in the leaves. When that water goes in the condenser, it cools down and go back again to a liquid. That liquid contains all the fragrance element and the water. Oil being like lighter than water, the oil sit on top of the water, you vacuum the water, and at the end you have the oil. That's how we extract through distillation most of the flowers, leaves, and many other things. So the first product you smell was done through this process, which go back like many years ago.
So have we passed out mint number 2 yet? So I think this one is labeled up as the mint heart.
So from the same leaves, but different process.
So the interesting thing, and I'd be interested to see what people think of this material.
God, I hate this.
It's very different, right?
Oh my God.
And yet, what you've got here it's part of mint.
This is incredibly violent. I mean, it really is. It's very, very aggressive.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
At the same time, we wanted something that's, it's like a punch in your face.
It's really shocking. I mean, it almost reminds me of an electrical fire. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah, that's like, again, after like you can describe it like a slightly metallic, but it's like what here you have in that ingredients as a perfumer, the way we're going to use it, it's not so much for a mint effect.
No.
It's for cooling.
Have you ever used this?
Yes. And if you use the spearmint, actually, it's almost fruity and sweet.
Right.
When you use that extract, it gives you like a very cold effect.
The mint heart?
Yes.
Really?
So
Yes.
this is basically, I think we have a slide to share this.
So just to go back to the process.
Yes.
So the first process you smell was the distillation. From that oil, today we have technology that are able to fraction that oil in as many pieces as we want. So we can reconstruct almost a new ingredients with the pieces that the perfumer will pick or choose for certain reason. And I think I love that idea because in a way that gives us a way to tailor-made today, natural for certain customer.
Because this is still effectively a natural material where
Yeah.
we've just taken a part out. So it's mostly mint. And yet what you get here is some of the benefits of cool, you get some of the benefits of bright and power. You don't get the association with mint, and then you're going to have to wrap it clearly because on its own, it's a little raw. But it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Let's go to the
little.
third one.
Wow. I mean, it smells like a fire in a chemical plant to me. This is alarming.
So, in this case, thank you.
Wow. I mean, if you built something around this, it would not have a wide appeal, but it would be an extraordinary work of olfactory art.
Well,
It would
actually,
take
at the
some
end,
of
you're going to smell something, build with it.
We're going to show you this in a minute. So, smell this one. So this is produced a different way.
So same leaves, different process. Here, it's what we call an absolute and an MD. The difference with the first mint you smell, actually this extraction is made with a very volatile solvent. So the way we extract the smell out of the leaves is like we put the leaves almost like, I think the easiest way to say it's almost like a washing machine. You put the leaves on certain tray, you put a solvent, and you wash the leaves with that solvent. You take that solvent out of that big machine, you put it in another condenser, you warm that liquid, the solvent being very volatile, the solvent evaporates, and after you left with all the fragrant components and the wax that are contained in the leaves. And you end up with something we call a concrete. It's called concrete because it's almost like it's a very thick liquid. So usually, concrete are done in many places of the world, and the last step is still done in grass for many of them. We want to control the last piece of that extraction. So I think we can go to the next slide. And that concrete in grass, we blend it with some alcohol. We lower the temperature to 0 degrees, and we filter to extract the wax out of that liquid. So you take the wax out, that liquid, you put that in a condenser, you warm it, the alcohol will evaporate, and you get what we call an absolute, which is like one of the most beautiful things in the world for me. And I've worked in that plant, and it's like good memories. So it's like you can see, it's a very long process, and that's why most of the absolute are very expensive ingredients. So what you're smelling, I've been going through that process, and on top of that, there is another process of, again, distillation to extract from that thick liquid all the components that don't evaporate, because an absolute is full of heavy components that don't evaporate, so don't bring anything to a perfume.
This is darker.
It's earthy, it's a little...
Leaf, I think of falling leaves, actually.
What's very interesting, and I think this is what, why are we sharing these with you today? What's interesting is we use the technology in different ways. The technologies that are available to us are opening up our ability to create fragrance materials, even with what seem like relatively mundane materials. Mint's just mint, right? Well, apparently not. And so you can take different pieces of these materials, and this is all natural. This is taking just different parts of a natural and getting a different performance. Now, we've showed the example of mint, but of course there are lots of these that you can do this with, and it's opening up the ability to take creativity to a new level. So this is where, in a way, the artistry comes together with technology and innovation to bring novelty. And this is the thing that we really want to invest the time in, finding these materials and helping bring these things to life. So, that was example number one. Let's go to the second example. We've got two things we'd like to share with you, which I think if you're a perfumer in this audience will be very familiar. But
Actually, we're going to give you a test. That'll be interesting.
I think it's easy enough because I think it comes up on screen.
Yeah.
Let's pass out the next one. Oh, we left out the molecular distillation. Let's move on though. Thank you.
So we're going to we're going to share with you like two molecules with you tonight. So again, it's like for the people who are not in our industry, because they always think like, oh my God, a synthetic product, that must be horrible. So we wanted to share with you tonight that a synthetic product actually can be beautiful on its own. It has many facets, so it's not just like one note. And cashmeron actually was created in the 60s. And I think what's very important too is like that particular molecule doesn't exist in nature. So you had a scientist that in a way created something. Yeah. And that for me, it's like another discussion. But
Well, by the way, I think one of the most interesting things about this artistic medium is unlike any of the others. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the only other medium that I've ever really, and it's difficult to call architecture a medium, but I mean in this case, for all intents and purposes, let's say that architecture and scent, works of architecture and works of scent, are the only works that actually have new raw materials every year. And if you look at paint, we know, for example, that we've seen all the colors that we will ever see. We've heard all the tonalities that we will ever hear, ever. But it is as if you're a painter and you have a new color or 3 or 4 new colors every year. And that's what's extraordinary about this.
And, go ahead.
and in a way, that's how you can create new trends, new family. And to go back to innovation, when a company creates that kind of things, it's a captive. Nobody else has it. So that gives you an edge to the competition.
And of course, from a point of view of creating those new heroes and those new those new fragrances that we want to keep for a long time and create new art, this novelty is helping drive new things and, as you say, new trends, which are very important for us because in the end, nowadays, it's quite easy to make fragrances that are a little safe. And one of the things that's really important is to work towards getting the design of a fragrance right, yes, but also to make sure it has something new to say. And I have no problem at all saying we showed you initially that what innovation can look like when you work with naturals, but it's also interesting to see what innovation can look like when we look at some of these real hero molecules that have come through. This is a well-known material. I think everybody who's worked in perfumery will know this material, but it's a superb material. It smells pleasant. Any comments in the audience about this one? Or should we save that till later? Maybe we'll save that till later. All right, let's show you the next one. Another, and this is kind of where the state of the art has reached. This is one of the new ambers. So this is effectively pretty new in the marketplace.
So this is like, as a perfumer, what we call a new modern ingredients. And it is very, violent.
No, you're smelling a raw material. This is a big amber, and it's big, it's dry, it's woody, it's got strong associations and very complex. And of course, it lets us build certain structures.
There's a single molecule.
Yeah.
One molecule.
Is this a true synthetic or a nature identical?
It's a true synthetic.
No. So it doesn't exist in nature.
Doesn't exist in nature, and doesn't exist outside of IFF. Sorry for the.
There's a little plug.
But the little plug. But it's just like, again, to show a trend. I think today we see more and more of these kind of ingredients in modern perfumery. These kind of ingredients, even if some of them existed already like probably 50 years ago, that's more and more where we're going.
This is astonishing.
So yes, it's violent, but I think it's the challenge, how do you dump these kind of animals?
No.
So one of the interesting things we're able to do, and this is part of the drive of working in the world of perfumery, is, as you say, there are new things coming through which allow us to take perfumery into different places. Clearly these materials we're showing you are single and very direct and on their own sometimes a little hardcore, but at the same time when you see the expertise and the brilliance of the perfumers, what they learn to do is they learn to dose these things in, and this is what drives the innovation and those new fragrances that move the world on, like some of the ones that are upstairs on the 4th floor.
You are not necessarily, Ian, you're not necessarily looking for novelty's sake, right? I mean, that's a leading question. Just because it's new doesn't make it good.
Clearly, there's a number of things that make a great fragrance. It needs to have some. I wholeheartedly agree with the idea that every fragrance needs to tell a story. It exists in a 3-dimensional space. It's going to have to exist through a period of time, and it needs to tell a story from beginning to end, and that needs to be something that people who you're talking to can relate to in some way. So when you talk about some of our fragrances, yes, there's always a story behind that brings them to life. And all those great fragrances that we have upstairs have a great story that you could tell about how that fragrance works, that people can understand and build through. So the story is great. The innovation helps you come up with the new story. but it shouldn't be the other way around. It's not just because it's new doesn't mean it's great. I mean, I could go into a lab and make something that nobody's ever smelled before. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a fragrance anyone would buy. So this is where the technical learning, the fact that it takes a long time to get to understand this industry and to understand the technology, to understand the innovation, are two things that you. Go ahead.
Go.
If I just can add something, and I think it's not only true in perfumery. When you have something that's very new, it takes time for the audience to get used to it. You'll be surprised that, like
all art.
And if it's not something that they can't link a memory or something, for them it's just like, wow.
Do you think that it takes more, less, or about the same time for the public to accept and to understand a new approach in olfactory art as it does in visual art or music?
I think the biggest challenge we have is finding appropriate ways to communicate with the men or the women that we're talking to, because what we have is a very cerebral art form. It's very difficult for people to understand and tell you what they like or don't like. And yes, it is. That gives a real challenge. So the communication is one of the things that all of us are struggling with as ways to get across to people. And one of the challenges, and we talk about this regularly, is, in fact, people want to hear the story probably much more than what that, the soup recipe that we tend to see quite often recorded of 10, 15
deadly.
magical things that people just don't know what they are.
Right.
The reality is a lot of the people and a lot of the women I'm making fragrances for with the people here, people don't know what these exotic materials are and can't visualize from that. So you have to find ways to bring that to life. And the reality is that's where the branding comes in.
And I think, because I don't want to give like a name or example, but I have a couple of fragrances in mind that I think they came out at the wrong time. They will be launched today, they'll be a huge success.
Right.
But they were launched 20 years ago, and I think people were not ready for that kind of fragrance.
Well, I mean, everybody talks about an artist being ahead of their time, so that always happens. I think that one thing that's very important is the way. Wait, when you interrupted me, I can't believe you interrupted me now, and I forgot what I was going to say.
I can do it.
Oh, with the performance. So this is interesting. So evolution. Challenge to you guys, and then an example. The challenge is L'Odyssée. L'Odyssée is upstairs. L'Odyssée was one of the 12 works of olfactory art that I chose because it is a work of minimalism. But what's interesting about it, it was commissioned by a Japanese designer, and the experience in Japan of scent is of it as being almost monotonal. And it doesn't vary because they don't have any tradition, a French tradition of, for example, Jiki, which is upstairs as well, which has this huge opening and then this evolution, and you go into the second act, and you go into the other sort of thing. And it doesn't do that at all. And it is like, this is the example I give, if you played an A on an oboe, and it just does that, and it doesn't evolve, it seems to me. Now, there's another one, and then you can respond to it, and you guys jump in too. Okay, the other example is Dolce & Gabbana Light Blue, which is spectacular. Fascinating scent. And the reason is that I think that what Olivier Cresp did in that was he created a completely different idea of evolution. To me, it is kinetic sculpture. The example I used is Alexander Calder, well, I'm sure you all know, who created a new kind of sculpture. He created individual pieces that were abstractions, and he linked them together. Each was viewable as its own piece, if you will, as its own sculpture, but he linked them all together as one, and you have the pieces at the same time as you have the whole. And I think that light blue evolves in a way that is completely, utterly unlike what you were talking about. And this is the reason I ask you how you do structure. Correct me if I'm wrong. What I get with this is one of them comes to the fore. By the way, it's lemon, a beautiful synthetic, brilliant synthetic accord of an olfactory tart green apple, and then a cedar that's spectacular. So you have these three pieces, and they evolve. But they revolve. They don't evolve in one direction. They revolve. You get one, you get the next, you get the other. It depends on how you move. It depends on the temperature. That I think is fascinating, and that's the reason I put it in the show.
And one of the magic things about perfumery is there's lots of answers, because yes, you can design fragrances that are very linear, or you could choose fragrances that are very evolutionary, if we want to use the word. And both of those can be very interesting because they tell a different story to different people. And this is where the part of the design is recognizing what you're trying to do and going for it, making sure you've got that story very clear and building the great idea through it. Because yes, you can build fragrances like l'Odyssée. The interesting thing with l'Odyssée, of course, is it was one of those fragrances at the time we were really shocked about quite how aquatic it was. You go upstairs and smell it today, that's not the part that's shocking about the fragrance. But there was, again, an example of the technology coming through and people using that material well. That was a brilliant fragrance. But it's today less shocking for different reasons. Today we almost find that you see the indolic side of the flower, in my opinion. It's a beautiful thing. And yet we've got used to it because the market has moved and people have become used to using those materials. And the perfumers in the room have figured out how to use this quite successfully.
One example I think of a work of olfactory art that actually works today. You were talking about you can't be before your time. What I think is interesting is Guilty, which comes out, and I think it gives it. I think that's a luxury perfume, but I don't mean luxury in a market sense. It isn't a luxury market, but I think it actually conveys a concept of pure luxury. And I don't know any other work that says I am this intellectualization in an olfactory sense of luxury itself, but it is stripped down. I think it's much more direct. I think it evolves much less than a Jicky Chanel number 5 and Interdit, you know?
But it was designed to deliver that.
Yes.
This is what we were trying to do all along.
Yes.
And this is the interesting piece, is when you're working on with perfumers with the scope and creative ability that we're connected to, you really end up in a place where you can decide up front, this one, we should be going after that expression of luxury, because you know what, in the Guilty there's this beautiful lilac note. It has a classic feel to it as opposed to being purely modern outlook, and yet at the same time it's not an old-fashioned fragrance.
Right.
And when you marry those two things up and get it right, you can talk to your audience, the women who you want to give that sensation of luxury, and that's why that fragrance naturally fell towards, when was finished, into an area like that. So the challenge for us is always making sure that we have, we work on a number of for different audiences. So the biggest challenge is knowing who your audience is, and then finding a way to talk to them.
Can we go back to the next thing to smell?
One more thing to smell.
Oh, we have one more thing.
Well, then we'll show you what they were all about. So let's jump sideways. Not everything is about single materials or about or about naturals. Here's the art of reconstruction. Thanks.
Thank you. There you go.
So here, what we wanted to show you living is because it is another technology and innovation that's now it's like a couple of years old.
Unbelievable.
But today we can capture any scent of anything. We have technology that we can capture. Here it's like it's a fruit, so we put a little glass bubble around it, and we're able to capture what are the scent molecule, and after we can analyze all these different molecules and reconstruct that scent. Was I clear?
Sure. I mean, here's a case where again, berries, not the easiest thing to get oils out of. So what you do is processes like this to recreate and bring innovative stories, because this is incredibly close to the odor you would actually find coming out of the plant.
And there is, sorry, Alan, and there is no way that we can extract through distillation or other extraction the scent of that fruit. This is really the only way to recapture the smell of it.
And for me, this is a very interesting magic of perfumery moment where you realize we've reached a state of the art where we have a palette of materials where, if you're clever, you can figure out what the odor is around anything you like, typically a plant or something like this, and you can reconstruct what that plant is putting into the air and create something that is more accurate than you'd ever get if you tried to process.
And we're not damaging nature because we just capture the scent.
So here's an example of it in action with a flower, with the great Subha Patel. And what you can see is you capture that. It's then, in fact, put through a GC machine, There's a GC machine. I think most people
which
here.
will break that scent in all these different molecules.
So again, this is a way technology is helping us these days to come through things. And you can see here, you have a little column where you've trapped the material. It goes into the machine. You can use a sniff port to figure out what comes out. And then what you do is you reconstruct with, now that you know literally what the molecules are, you've often got them available in the lab anyway. And so you start from something that looks a bit like this, and you create a fragrance like this. And I think this is a state of the art. I think this is very interesting to see that you can do this, and this is something that is regularly used in lots of fragrances now to come up with novelty and something innovative, because you're actually spending the time to start trying to track down those magical odors and recreate them.
And just if I can add that there is still a perfumer behind the living. It's not just like, you get the analysis and you just put these things together and it smells wonderful. Usually you have like a lot of work behind to rebalance all these ingredients to make sure that it smells nice at the end or closer to like what you got in nature.
So here's the fun part, or a slight reveal. All of those things we just talked about are all in one fragrance. The test for the perfumers in the room is which one. What we're going to show you, though, is the very first version, the one that didn't end up in the market. And
But the one that Ian fell in love with.
So the very first idea, as it comes through before we've actually worked it.
There you go. Wow.
So in this, you can see a strong idea. You can see it's very bright, it's very fresh. Greenness is a little uncontrolled. It's a bit grassy.
It's interesting.
But at the same time, it has brightness, freshness, and it's very contemporary, but it's a little raw. And one of the things that we can do as we collaborate with the perfumers and we work with our design team to help figure out these things and bring these fragrances to life in a way that's appropriate is to work this fragrance up through typically several hundred reworks, modifications, till you get to a finished item where you've figured out all of those pieces of structure, of creative elements, and you make the finished fragrance. Why don't we smell the one we actually launched? So here you go. This is related to that version, but became a finished fragrance.
Now this is the actual market product.
This is the market product now.
When did you launch it?
Fairly recently. That was hang on a sec. Within the last year.
That's amazing. It's so much smoother. It's more linear. It's more
So
polished.
you can see you had to work the fragrance. You had to take those fresh notes. Now the fun part in this, I don't know if everybody has picked up on this, but in here, if you look for it, you'll see that goji berry. You'll see those cashmeran. That's a bit further down. You'll see that new amber. You'll see those the specialty mints. They're all in this fragrance.
So, and I think as a perfumer, the challenge is to keep the integrity of that first idea in the finished product.
Yeah.
So that's how you build a fragrance. You start off with an idea, you work it through to a point where you decide where it's going, where you should take it, and the art of design is finishing it up in an interesting and polished way, suitable for the audience you're trying to design it for.
And if I can just add like something very quickly, if you smell the first fougère, the first blotters we gave you, you can see the evolution, modernization of a fougère.
Yeah.
So that gives you a little window into the art of modern perfumery, and this is what we're doing every day, all day, is trying to take those. Sometimes we're looking for the new ideas, and a lot of the time we're working it up to the point where it's ready to show to the audience we're designing it for.
We can do a few questions.
So,
if you'd like.
any thoughts, anybody? Any questions?
I'd say this
There's
is
a microphone
astonishing
we
to
want
me
to
how
hand out.
polished it is. It's like glass. It shines.
Yes, and it has a brilliancy too that I think that we know that men have really responded well to.
No.
Please, I think there's a microphone coming.
The headspace technology. I mean, I was thinking as you were talking, that basically scent was an analog experience. But with headspace technology, could you say that this is maybe the beginning of the digital version of scent?
There's still a huge art form behind. I mean, the technology behind it. Yes, you can get remarkably close. You can analyze anything and figure out roughly what chemistry is going on inside, because whether it's a natural or a synthetic, there's lots of you're talking of chemistry, and nowadays the techniques are incredibly sophisticated to be able to understand what's there. However, there's still an artistry that goes with actually figuring out. So I think it does take you towards that. I don't think it takes over.
And I think the complexity of a work of olfactory art of this kind, I don't think the analog digital analogy really. I mean, I think you just smell in analog still. It's hugely complex. There's many layers.
It's like taking a picture of nature and recreated it. And I think what's actually very complex is like there is still many things that we don't know what they are. There is still many, when you like see all these peaks, we may only know like 50% of them. So I think the challenge afterwards, like to go to R&D, try to see if we can recreate all these beautiful things. I'm sorry? Oh, it's much more complex than that.
Any others?
Any other questions?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm from the industry. So I have a question basically. I was listening to you and you talk a lot about scent, of course, and audience. You never mention concept. I'm talking about marketing concept. So I would be interested to know how you connect and how you make sure you have a cohesiveness between the scent you are composing and the marketing concept and the story you're going to tell to consumers.
Well, I think there's two pieces to that, because yes, the task we were trying to bring to life today is the pure art form, but clearly there's another thing that has to happen, which is to get this fragrance in front of consumers, in front of people who are going to buy our product, and to that right audience. There's a real challenge, and this is where marketing obviously has to come in, because in fact what people are buying into is the dream of the entire thing. People want to buy into the branding, they want to see the fragrance, but the way to get people to understand what fragrance is and whether they should like it, one of the best tools for communicating is through the branding. That's why you have branding. Otherwise we could put fragrances in milk bottles and we could sell them at a huge fortune. The reality is, people want to buy into and they understand the concept of the luxury because it's got the branding with it. Now, where does that come in? Well, it starts pretty early. It doesn't. We don't just get to the end and go, well, let's see, what should we do with this, and just kind of randomly throw it in and hope for the best. There is quite a lot of. There's an art form, because of course we're bringing to life the dreams of the designers as well. So what we're often doing is we're getting quite a long step towards having a fragrance, because getting a fragrance where it's, as you can see what we're talking today, hundreds of iterations. It's an iterative process. It's collaborative. We have to work together to bring this to bring these things to life. That has to go a fair step before you're in a position to say that that you can even share it with people to understand what it is. Because if we'd taken that first modification and started to share that broadly, I think people wouldn't have understood it. So we have to go a certain step before you to the point where you're going. Now, we very early go, this could be a great young men's fragrance because it's got freshness and brightness and masculinity, and it's going to be quite easy to understand, but we then need to fix these things. That immediately leads you to certain places. And that part we keep, how we do that one is one thing we keep a little internal.
But I think that's where they are, in a way, is the magician. I cannot say that word. Magicien. Because I know it's difficult to understand, like, how can a perfumer can work without a concept. But I think that's where you have the freedom, in a way, to create, first of all, the best fragrance possible. Why do you need a concept? I think, if you think how perfume existed before. You were waiting to have a fragrance ready, and the concept came almost afterwards to sell that fragrance, which I think is genius. And today we do the opposite way, and I don't think it's the best way. I think it's better to have a very good product. Of course, you need to have kind of an idea, what you're going to launch in a year or two. But I think it's very smart in a way to try to extract the best of the composition and let them be the magician to find a room for it.
There's no doubt about it. If you get it wrong, you won't succeed. And that's the commercial reality we have to get right. But that's part of the magic is trying to make sure we keep the dream from the perfumer and the dream from the designer. And part of our challenge is to make sure we get it right. Any more questions?
And Ian, I'm actually gonna.
Are we running out of time?
On time. Yes, you can. You're welcome to come up afterwards. Let's do one more. Let's do one.
Go ahead.
Thank you. You said earlier that there's a story to a fragrance that can be explained to people, and as a civilian, I'm not really sure what that means. Is it a series of adjectives, or is it a progression? Can you give me an example?
I'll give you two examples. I think one from our house and maybe one from a competitor. Let's take the example of something like Angel, right? Angel, love it or hate it, it's a real statement. It's very well created, but the story behind that fragrance, it's all about the candy floss, because it's got in there's this. You don't talk about ethyl maltol, you don't talk about the patchouli, you talk actually about what the story is, how they've created this big, powerful vision of candy floss, and it was an early gourmand fragrance. Another example is coming back to the light blue example. The magic in that fragrance is it delivers this beautiful freshness, and how it does it is it's doing it through certain materials which have a very specific structure. The beauty in it is the lemon and the cedarwood, and it delivers this beautiful freshness that can take you to this wonderful Mediterranean environment in your mind. And so the story in the fragrance is not about individual materials, but about the overall explanation of the structure. Does that help? A bit?
If I can just add something, because you touch a point where I think it's a challenge in our industry to tell story about perfume. I think the best way we are finding today is people connect to fragrance through emotion a lot. So how can we, through a little story, put them in a situation where they will have certain emotion that when they smell the fragrance they can connect to it. So it's not fully a story, but in a way it could be a real story. And I think we have challenges today how to tell that story, because it's an experience. And I think the distribution is, for me, a big issue. You have 900 launches, you go to a store, and you have 2 seconds to make your mind. So how can you tell a story when people, after 2 seconds, if they don't like it, they walk away? So it's a challenge as an industry to be able to recapture the dream and to tell that story.
So as I say, we're talking of a cerebral art form. We're very close to this, and it's actually quite difficult to explain. Maybe one last example. I was just thinking as you were talking there. Our original Hugo fragrance, right back. First time I saw that as an accord was back in March 1993. Wasn't the finished fragrance, but the perfumer, Dave Appel, had this amazing idea. He'd been off to Acadia National Park, and he'd experienced the idea of the trees that were right by the ocean. It's a pine forest. There's lots of ferns, and it's right by the sea. He took those 3 materials, built a sketch, smelled it, and built it. Showed it to us, and you could literally see the pieces. We built it into a fragrance, and we were able to talk an outdoorsy concept to people that has been very successful, and we've been selling it for the last 15, 17 years now, very successfully, based on the fact that there's this very coherent idea that we were able to build into the product. So the important thing is to get the message across and to build something interesting. But of course, we can't do it without the collaboration of a large number of people. And that's what's so exciting to be in front of this audience. I say thank you very much for listening to us. If you're in the industry already, I think unless there's any other questions, shall we close now?
Thank you so much for coming, everybody. We're really thrilled you're here.